Okay, there we go. We're recording. So this virtual session, ecosystems and ecology. So our objectives are going to be to review key ecosystems concepts, and then we are going to demonstrate the interdependence of organisms by organizing the story of the day it literally rained cats, right? So yes, there will be cats raining in this story, but it has to do with ecosystems. So a few key summary points of ecosystems. You might already know this, right? If you don't, I would definitely add it to your notes. If you don't have notes, then I would be writing some notes down. So ecosystems are composed of both living and non-living things. And so the science terms for those are abiotic and biotic. So it's not just animals and plants, right? It's also abiotic factors. So who can tell us in the chat or by speaking what an abiotic factor might be? Sun, water, great ones, right? Sun, water, rocks, soil to some extent, right? Soil has a lot of living stuff in it as well, but the actual dirt part, yeah, so those would be non-living factors of an ecosystem, which are clearly important, right, for things to exist in the ecosystem. So energy gets transferred up the food chain or food web, and energy is lost along the way, which we will talk about in a second. When you eat something, you don't obtain 100% of that energy, right? You actually only get 10% of your energy when you're eating. So that means really that you have to eat massive quantities. So think about an herbivore, something that only eats plants. They're pretty much eating all day, right? Like a cow or even rabbits. Rabbits eat a lot for their size, right? Because they're eating all plants and they're only getting 10% energy from that, so they have to eat a lot. All right. Also, organisms are interdependent upon each other and are balanced by carrying capacity and environmental restrictions, right? So what might that mean? Well, carrying capacity is basically the max amount of organisms that can live in that ecosystem and be supported, right? So that's going to be dependent on predators, amount of food, amount of water, resources, shelter, right? If it's an organism that needs some kind of sheltered area, could also be determined by climate, disease. Kendrick, stop. Kendrick got a banana toy, guys, and he's obsessed with it, but it's really loud. It's like a crinkly toy. Anyway, he just walks around carrying a huge banana. It's pretty cute. And annoying in the morning to hear. So that carrying capacity, right, is really going to be probably not usually reached. Most organisms don't reach their carrying capacity, right? Because that would be the max amount that you could possibly have. But we can actually look at that on a graph. Usually we can see where the carrying capacity is of organisms if we do some population math, basically. And then, of course, environmental restrictions, right? Is there enough food, water, shelter, etc., for organisms to live? Right? If not, they're going to start dying, and that's going to impact other organisms. So when we kill one organism, and I'm not talking about a single one, I'm talking about like a group of them. So let's say that we want to kill cockroaches because we don't like them, right? That would actually end up being detrimental to an ecosystem in some way. Would it necessarily impact us? Maybe not, right? But it might in the future. It might impact other organisms that would then impact us, right? So it's kind of that kind of thinking where it's like, even though we don't really like cockroaches, and maybe we don't really see their full purpose, if we wiped them all out, it would actually impact other organisms. Okay, so also keep in mind, you might see this word when we do ecosystem stuff called a niche. That's spelled like that, N-I-C-H-E. Does anyone Has anyone come across that word and maybe figured out what it meant or think they might know what it means? Bella says it's their job or role. That's a great guess. So it actually means like a specific place in the environment, which in some ways could be their job or role. So specific part of the ecosystem. So like niche animals need really specific things. So maybe they need a certain amount of sunlight or a certain type of plant, right? So if you think about pandas, their niche would be with bamboo, right? Because they need to eat that to survive. So it's kind of like a specific part. It's a strange word to see, and the first time you see it, you're going to be like, what? But think about it in terms of a specific part of an ecosystem, and it will hopefully make more sense. Okay. So then, most of us are probably already familiar with that, right? Vocab. I'm not going to define the vocab for you, but I just want you to make sure that you have all these words. Really, the most confusing part about ecosystems and environmental studies really is that a lot of these words mean the same thing, right? Producers are also autotrophs. Decomposers and consumers are both heterotrophs, right? Herbivores can be consumers. So it kind of gets convoluted because all these words are sort of meaning the same things. So make sure that you know what they all mean, right? And make sure you know which ones have overlap. Okay, Kendrick, okay. So for example, producer and autotroph can be the same thing, right? Autotroph just means something that makes its own food. So this PowerPoint's gonna go up into Canvas. So if you need to look at these words for longer, you can, right? But just make sure you have the vocab defined. So energy flow. When we're looking at energy flow in an ecosystem, and the reason that we draw the arrows pointing up the food chain, you might have noticed that. If we have this food chain over here, see if I can draw on this pretty nicely. So when we draw a food chain, where's my mouse? There it is. No. Oh, okay, good. Not what I wanted to draw, but couldn't find where I was. Okay, so when we have a food chain, you guys may have noticed the arrows go from the grass to the mouse, and then from the mouse to the snake, and then from the snake to the hawk, right? The arrows actually point up the food chain. In this case, those arrows are actually representing energy transfer or energy flow. So you would maybe think that the arrow would go the other way to show what that animal's eating, right? But it's not about that. It's about the energy flow. So we see energy flow and food chains and food webs represented in many ways, and one of them is in this pyramid. Why do you think this pyramid is a good way to represent an ecosystem food chain? Like, why is producers on the bottom and the biggest? Okay, because they have the most amount of energy. Ooh, that's a great suggestion from Destiny, because it shows the levels of energy flow from the different roles. It shows how there are more animals or producers on the bottom, and the higher you go, the less animals there are. Okay, so all three of you are kind of right. Producers do technically have the most amount of energy, right? Because they are taking sunlight and creating sugar. They are the bottom. They're basically starting at 100% energy. It's also showing us the different roles, right, and how they're connected to each other. Very true. And how energy is going to flow up the pyramid. And Bella has a great suggestion here, right? That there's more producers, right? Think about it. There's way more plants than there are animals, right? And think about a carnivore like a hawk. You don't see 3,000 hawks in the air, right? If you did, well, if I did, I would be very scared. There's not that many of them, right? Because there's not a lot of food for them. So as we move up a food chain, we're going to see less and less of that animal. Because when we get to the top, right, it's basically saying that you really don't have that much food below you to choose from. Now, it can be confusing when you have omnivores in here, because, for example, like humans, right, we're the top of a food chain, and there's a lot of us, right? There's still more plants. But we can eat plants and animals. So that kind of opens up an opportunity for us to have more of like a square kind of shaped pyramid where there's more of us than hawks, for example. Okay, so as I ramble about food chains and all this, so really 10% of the energy gets passed on, that's it. And the real question is then, well, where does the rest of the energy go? What happens to the 90% of energy that's not transferred? This is a hard question that we might not know, but most of it actually, yeah, Elizabeth, that's a great suggestion. Some of it gets used in the organism itself, right? Plants, for example, use some of their energy. Whenever you eat a plant, you gain 10% of that energy from the plants, and the rest of it kind of just stays in the plant, right? Some of that energy gets released as heat, and the rest, yeah, I mean, most of it gets released as heat. I would say 80% of it gets released as heat. But yeah, so it really doesn't, not all the energy has to transfer. Some of it you're using to survive, right? Some of it is released as heat, and then 10% gets passed on. So what that means is that as we move, some math for you guys, right? If we start out at producers, they would have 100% energy. Our primary consumers will have 10%. Our carnivore will have 1%. And our top tertiary carnivore here would have 0.1%. So essentially only 10%, that 0.1% doesn't look very pretty. I tried to move it and it's not letting me. Let's see if I can move it. There we go. So that 0.1% of energy is what the carnivore ends up getting from where the energy started in the plants. Okay. There is a question like this on, I believe, on the Module 4 exam. It might also be on the segment exam, right? Which is why I'm going over it. So the hawk would have to eat more than the snake. Exactly. Well, it kind of depends too on the size, right? The snake might have to eat more if it's a bigger organism. But in theory, yes, the hawk would have to eat more than the snake because it's only getting 0.1% of that energy. Okay. Let me erase all these arrows and things here. So that was like a little background on ecosystems. I'm sure a lot of that was review for you guys, but it's always good to hear it. I know a lot of times people think, oh, ecosystems is so easy. And it is easy, especially compared to some of the molecular stuff we were doing before, but it does have a lot of vocab and it's a lot of critical thinking. So it's barely any of the answers are just something that you're like, oh, it's this. A lot of the answers, there could be 10 different answers and they could all be right. So it can be hard in that regard that you do have to be critically thinking. All right, so we're gonna do this activity called The Day It Literally Rained Cats. Check out the parachuting cat. Will make sense in a second. Okay, so I'm gonna share this document with you guys. So this is a true story, right? And we'll talk about the story a little bit more after we do the activity here. I just shared you guys in the Google Doc. So what I want you to do is open the document and make your own copy of it. And we're going to spend about 5 minutes by ourselves trying to put these in order. So basically what happened is something happened, and all these events are descriptions of what happened. And I gave you the first one, and we'll talk about what DDT is and what that means. And, ooh, excuse me, gotta have more coffee. And you guys are gonna try to put these events in order of how they happened to tell the story. So DDT is a pesticide, right? It used to be the #1 pesticide used to kill mosquitoes. And you guys may have, depending on where you've lived and your experiences, you might have even seen, they still have, especially in Texas where I grew up, trucks that drive by at night and just spray pesticide into the air to kill mosquitoes. Right, and mosquitoes are a nuisance, which is part of the problem, but also they carry disease. So people get malaria, right? People can get West Nile virus. What's the new one that's happening in Central America? I don't remember what it's called. Zika, thank you, right? Zika can be spread by mosquitoes. So we want to keep the mosquito population contained to some extent because we don't want to keep having those diseases spread. So DDT was really effective. It killed mosquitoes like crazy. So it was just getting sprayed everywhere. And this is, of course, before we really knew about pesticides and the fact that they could also maybe affect humans. Well, DDT gets stored in fat tissue. So now they're finding out that people, for example, me, I never was alive when DDT was used. I probably have DDT in my body, right? Because I was breastfed and my mom was exposed to it and it got stored in her fat tissue and she passed it on to me. If I have a child and breastfeed my child, I will pass that DDT on to them, right? So it's a tiny, tiny amount. Is it going to, ruin my body chemistry? Probably not. But it's kind of disturbing that it's getting stored and passed on for generations, even after we've stopped using it. So that was kind of one of the things that we didn't know was going to happen, is that DDT was actually going to stay in the population. So there's a pretty high chance that you might even have DDT in your body if you were breastfed, right? Because your parents might have been exposed to it when they were younger, or their parents might have been exposed to it. Okay, so DDT is pretty intense. So in the document, the first thing that happened was the World Health Organization, also known as the WHO, provided DDT to the citizens of, I think it's pronounced Borneo, pretty sure. I always look it up every year because I always want to pronounce it wrong. If I'm pronouncing it wrong, we'll check actually. We'll have the computer read it to me. Doesn't it read from Wikipedia? Let's see. Maybe not. Oh, whoops, no. It's not what I wanted. YouTube, how to pronounce.
Borneo.
Borneo, I was close. Okay, there we go. Never hurts to look stuff up. So Borneo. Okay, where is Borneo, right? Because that's kind of important too to think about. It is in Indonesia, and we zoom out here, right? We can get more of a visual of where it's located, right? So a super tropical area. You can imagine there's going to be a ridiculous amount of mosquitoes there. Okay, so what was happening? People were getting malaria and dying. So the World Health Organization said, oh, great, we'll just go get tons of DDT, spray it all over the entire island, and we'll be good to go. So then a bunch of other stuff happened. So I'm going to be quiet now for about 5 minutes. I want you guys to look on your own Google Doc that you've made a copy of and actually try to place these events in order of how they happened. And you're welcome to talk in the chat to each other if you're like, hey, where'd you guys put this? Or you could work totally by yourself, up to you. And then we'll go over it. Okay, so 5 minutes right now at 9:26, we will come back and actually try to tell this story. I'm going to grab the answer key. All right, so hopefully you've had a chance to at least read them, right? We'll talk about what some of these things mean if you weren't 100% sure. Not only does this involve you having to think about the food chain situation here, but also sort of some of these events could have happened at the same time, right? Which makes it a little hard to make them in one order. But what do you guys think is the second event? So first, DDT is provided, and then what happens? The mosquitoes were eradicated. Excellent. So what does eradicated mean, just in case maybe we weren't sure, because that could have been a hang up here for us. What does it mean if we eradicate something? Yeah, destroy. Right, destroyed, killed, gone, ruined, put an end to, exactly. Right, so remember, no reason you couldn't look that up if you read it and were like, eradicated. All right, so mosquitoes are eradicated, cool. Then what happens? Tony, can you please turn that down or like put headphones on? Elizabeth's taking a guess. Roaches store DDT in their body. Yeah, sure. Right? Like I said, some of these things could kind of happen at the same time. So you might be off by 1 or 2 numbers, and that's fine, as long as you're getting like the general story. Okay, so roaches store DDT in their bodies, right? They, just like humans, can store it in their bodies. So then what happened? Lizards consume the roaches that have the DDT in their bodies. Great. What happens to the lizards? They become lethargic and then they disappear. What does lethargic mean? Lazy, right? Or really tired. Like lethargic is like you're so tired you can't get up. You're just like, And if they're eating basically poison, I mean, that's what's going to happen to them, right? Oh, you think the cats ate the lizards first? Ah, good. We skipped that. So lizards became lethargic, then the cats can eat them, right? So if you're a lizard and you're literally just laying there because you're so tired, well, you're going to get eaten. Thank you, Jordan. Then the lizards disappear because the cats ate them all. Cool. Now, where do the caterpillars come in? Who do you think was maybe eating the caterpillars? The cats have to be parachuted in before they can. Well, we'll see. Because look, there's also a level here of cats dying. So the cats being parachuted in is actually to solve the issue. But that's a good point. So lizards, people are saying lizards are the ones who are eating the caterpillars, right? So when the lizards are gone, caterpillar numbers are going to increase, right? And then what do the caterpillars do? They start consuming people's houses, right? Which is their first issue where people are like, wait, what? No, what are these caterpillars doing here? They're eating my house. Okay, so that happens. All right, then we also at the same time have cats dying. Exactly. They didn't have a food source. Also, they ate the poisoned lizards, right? DDT is a poison. So in small quantities, it's not going to be a problem. But when you're eating 400 lizards and having a feast, it's going to kill you. So the cats die. So then who's multiplying because the cats are dead? The rats, right? Rats are like, cool, this is a great life. And then guess what happens? Rats bring the plague, right? And we're talking about the Black Plague, like that wiped out 6 million people in Europe plague. Huge issue, right? So now the World Health Organization is actually panicking. They're like, oh no, what do? We took away malaria and now the plague is here and people's houses are getting eaten. So then what do? They actually parachute cats in. Literally, they had boxes with a parachute and they dropped them out of planes and released the cats. And what were the cats supposed to do? Eat the rats, right? Which they hoped would restore some semblance of normalness to the ecosystem, right? And it kind of worked, but really once the mosquitoes came back, then it worked. But because mosquitoes, of course, will come back, right? You can't kill them forever. But basically, this is a really easy way to see how all we did was kill mosquitoes, and yet we impacted caterpillars, rats, cats, roaches, people, right? We're all impacted, and we're not really seeing like plants or any kind of abiotic factors here, but those things were probably also impacted as well, which we could easily come up with ways to think that if we wanted to. Right, so this is just a classic example. So this was a true story. I was trying to find the article for it. I can't remember who it was published by. I thought it was the New York Times, but I could be wrong. But let's see if I can find it. World Health Organization, day it rained cats. I don't know if this is it. Let's see if it's this one. Oh, continue to read. No. Oops, that's not what I wanted to do. About to watch some random teacher's video. I want to see the PDF. Okay, so I believe this might be the actual newspaper article. I hope so. Nope, it's a just summary of what happened. All right, well, if I find it and you're interested in seeing it, I am happy to send it out to you guys. But basically, this was a true story. I believe this happened in the 70s. And so all of those cats had to be parachuted in and basically sacrificed, right? Which is sad because they were eating rats with the plague. So a lot of them ended up dying. Okay, so back to the PowerPoint here. That's pretty much the end of this little virtual session. You can get 5 points extra credit on any assignment or test by commenting or adding the code word to your assignment. And I'm going to pop the code word into the chat right now. It is kind of complex. It is actually a species of something that I found in my yard. So that is the code word. You could Google it if you'd like to know what species that is, because I don't want to say it, and actually I could type it in the chat. So that's the code word. You can get 5 points extra credit on any assignment. This could be a future assignment, a previous assignment, anything that you're thinking you might want some extra points on for attending today. Okay, does anybody have any questions about the class, about this virtual session, about how to get your points? Okay, I'll assume we have no questions. If you do, you can always send me an email. And I hope you enjoyed learning about the day it literally rained cats. Otherwise, I'm going to end this session, and I will see you guys next week. Yes, Jordan, that is the password. Without the V in front, but yes.